Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the second webinar in our Learn with Scholars Portal webinar series. This series is really intended to draw on some of the more specialized technical skills that Scholars Portal staff have developed over the years to help library staff at OCUL libraries to develop practical technical skills and expertise in new areas. And the topic that we will be discussing today is web accessibility. I have a few housekeeping notes before we begin. We will have a presentation, and during that presentation, if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat. You will find that you are not able to unmute yourself. The presentation is being recorded today, and that recording will later be sent out to everybody who registered, as well as put up on the Scholars Portal YouTube channel. After the presentation, we will turn off the recording and we will turn on the ability for people to unmute themselves again. And at that point, if you want to unmute yourself to ask a question, you will be able to do so. We do have live captioning enabled today. So if you require, or if you would like to see the live captioning, you can click on the little CC icon on the menu bar and be able to view that live captioning. The slides are also available. I will put the link in the chat now. If you would like to follow along or click on any of the links as they come up, then you are welcome to do so in the slideshow, which is now in the chat. So just before we get going today, I want to acknowledge the land that Scholars Portal is on and where Scholars Portal staff live and work. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and more recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit. And today, this meeting place is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we're grateful to have the opportunity to live and to work on this land. And since this is an OCUL-wide webinar today, we encourage you to reflect on the land that you are on today. I'm going to put a link in the chat to nativeland.ca, which can help provide some information about the land you're on. And if you would like to add your own land acknowledgement to the chat, then you are welcome to do so at this time. All right, and that is all from me. So now I will pass it over to Kaitlin to start the presentation on web accessibility.
Thanks, Sabina. Hi, everyone. I'm Kaitlin Newson. I'm the Digital Projects Librarian with Scholars Portal. I wear a few different hats in this role, but in terms of web accessibility, I've been focused recently on improving accessibility in our Dataverse service. And I've also been doing testing across a number of our different services to track issues and find areas where we can improve. Bart, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Bart Kawula, and I am the Web and Discovery Services Librarian at Scholars Portal. Over the years, my role has largely revolved around developing the applications that comprise Scholars Portal, and I fully admit that I've made some glaring accessibility blunders in the past. I'm not an authority on accessibility matters, and the only reason I possess the knowledge I have is because I've been trying to learn from my mistakes. And my hope is that I can save others from doing the same and improve the library web space for everybody. Back to you, Kaitlin.
Thanks, Bart. All right, so today you're going to get a crash course in web accessibility. This is a really big topic, so we won't be able to cover everything today, but hopefully you'll come away from the webinar with a better understanding of some of the core concepts and practices that you can use to improve accessibility in your own web content. So we're going to start today by talking about some background on web accessibility and some different assistive technologies. Then we'll talk about some web accessibility practices, followed by some ways that you can test your web content. Then we'll wrap up with a few points about accessibility in our workflows and some additional resources, and then we'll have some time for Q&A and discussion at the end. So let's get started with some background. There are a lot of different reasons that we should be mindful about accessibility. By ensuring that our digital content is accessible, we can reduce barriers for users and ensure equitable access to our services. Focusing on accessibility can also bring improvements for all of our users. So for example, if we make sure our video content is captioned, then we can also ensure that it's accessible to deaf users, but this can also benefit users in public spaces who can't play audio. This is sometimes also known as the curb cut effect, where curb cuts are essential for wheelchair users, but they're also helpful for other road users, like somebody that's using a cart or a stroller. On a side note, if you are a podcast fan, the podcast 99% Invisible has a really interesting episode about the history of curb cuts, which I've linked to in the speaker notes. And of course, as university affiliated organizations in Ontario, we're all legally required to follow accessibility standards, which includes making our public digital spaces fully accessible. And this applies to all universities across OCUL. So when we talk about web accessibility, there are a few terms that you might come across frequently. One common term that you may encounter is A11Y or ALI. This is a short form of the word accessibility because there are 11 letters between the A at the beginning and the Y at the end. The next is ARIA, which you may encounter if you're a developer or are testing code. This stands for Accessible Rich Internet Applications. And this is a specification that defines ways you can make web markup more accessible. It expands the semantics of HTML to improve accessibility in cases where it is needed, but it's not required to use in all cases. The AODA, which I'm sure many on this webinar are already familiar with, is the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act. This is our guiding legislation for accessibility in Ontario, and Manitoba, Nova Scotia, and BC also all have their own provincial accessibility legislation. Within the AODA, you can find reference to WCAG. This stands for the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and this is an international standard for web content. It has 3 different conformance levels. Level A is the minimum or lowest, AA is in the middle, and AAA is the highest standard. In Ontario, we're expected to conform to WCAG level AA, specifically version 2.0 of the standard. But the latest version is 2.1, which I would recommend following rather than 2.0 so that you're meeting the latest standards and are also future-proofing your websites. And I've also included a link in the speaker notes to more information about what is changed in WCAG 2.1 compared to 2.0. So we won't go into all of the details of what's included in WCAG. That could be a full webinar on its own. But broadly, the guidelines are based on 4 key principles, which are also known as the POUR principles. So the first is perceivable. This means it's available to all of the senses, primarily vision and hearing, either through the browser or through assistive technologies like screen readers and magnification tools. Operable means that users can interact with all controls and interactive elements using either the mouse, keyboard, or an assistive device. Understandable means that content is clear and limits confusion and ambiguity. And robust, this means a wide range of technologies, including old and new user agents and different assistive technologies, can access this content. So not all disabilities will impact the use of websites. When considering web accessibility, we can think broadly about disabilities in 4 different categories. The first is visual. So this can include things like low vision, blindness or color blindness. Auditory, which includes deafness or hard of hearing. Cognitive disabilities, this includes things like learning disabilities or memory and focus issues. And motor disabilities, which includes things like limited motor control, reduced response or reaction times, or potentially an inability to use a mouse. So in these categories, there's a really broad range of technologies that people with disabilities will use to interact with digital content and websites. So some of these can include screen readers. This is software that reads content of websites and pages to users. Some that are commonly used include JAWS and NVDA, which are on Windows, and VoiceOver on Mac. It is also worth noting that not all screen reader users are blind. Screen magnification tools are applications that allow users to zoom or magnify their screen. Some may use the built-in zooming tools in a browser or an operating system, or a separate application like Zoom Text. There are also Braille displays, which are devices that output web pages to Braille, and there's an image of one of these on the slide. I just think that they're so neat, so I always include an image wherever I can. And speech input software is software that allows users to navigate web pages with voice controls. So again, this can be voice controls built into an operating system, or they can be installed software like Dragon's dictation applications. So another assistive technology is a switch control. These are devices that allow users to navigate web pages with maybe a single button or multiple buttons. The image on this slide is one example of a switch device which has 2 buttons and is Bluetooth connected. But there are a lot of different types depending on a user's preferences or needs. And switch controls can also be enabled in some operating systems and on mobile devices too. Motion or eye tracking tools are systems that allow users with motor disabilities primarily to navigate with head movements, motion, or eye movements. So they might use a special kind of webcam setup that tracks their eye movements, and it might perform in a similar way to a mouse. And it might be used in combination with a switch device or on its own. Head pointers and mouse sticks, these are devices that a user might wear on their head or use in their mouth to interact with a computer. They could be used to interact with a touchscreen or a keyboard. And the last one I wanted to mention is kind of these general operating system accessibility settings. So I've mentioned quite a few of them already, but there are some other ones, including things like high contrast themes or operating system settings that can be used to reduce motion for users. So there's really a large range of assistive technologies and for people that may interact with our websites. So in order to make our content accessible to the people using these technologies, there are a lot of practices that we can follow in how we develop and design our applications. And I'm going to pass it over to Bart to talk about some of these.
Let me just switch my slides here. All right, can everybody see that? Yes, all right. So in this section, I'll be talking about web accessibility practices. My hope is to cover the most critical things that make web content not only more accessible, but a lot more usable. I think it's important to make the distinction that even though something can be made accessible in that it checks off all of the requirements, it might not necessarily be very usable. Accessibility and usability are related, but not necessarily equivalent, at least in my own experience. Even if your web page or document passes all of the automated WCAG compliance checkers, the content can still be difficult to read and the functionality difficult to use. Our goal should always be to reduce the amount of time someone takes in using assistive technology to complete a task or read a document. And that brings me to my second point. All digital documents, including the slides for this webinar, are web content. It doesn't matter if you're building a page template in a Word management system like Drupal or LibGuides, or you're writing a Word document that gets shared. All of these principles apply more or less equally. These are the topics that I'll be covering today. If you're familiar with them, that's great. If not, even better. It can take a lot of nuance and experience to use them properly and unlearning some of the wrong ways to use them, which was certainly the case for me. So let's begin. The most critical and yet neglected accessibility feature is the mighty alt tag, or sorry, alt attribute on images. I'm sure many of you have been scolded at some point for not including alt attributes. Every single use of an image element must have an alt attribute. Even if the image is decorative and doesn't communicate any value or content, without an alt attribute, a screen reader will declare that there's an image and nothing more. But if the alt attribute is present and it's empty, then the screen reader knows to skip it and won't announce that there's an image. That's for decorative images, but if the image is part of the content, then it most definitely needs to have some sort of text value. Writing alt text is an art, but there are a few things that should be considered to get it mostly right. Most importantly, it's context. Is an image described in the text? If so, a simple caption is enough. If the image requires more of an explanation, the text should be moved into its own paragraph text or like a description label. Stock photos and icons are visual cues, and it makes no sense to label these for screen readers and just results in excessive verbiage. The same applies for using phrases like image of or picture of, because the screen reader will already declare that that's an image. And if you go to the link here on the webaim.org website, they have a great list of best practices for when and how to label an image. Image alt attributes aren't just found in HTML. If you're making a PDF or PowerPoint presentation public, they need to be included too. In most cases, all you need to do is right-click on the image to be given the option to add the alt text, which is what the screenshot on this page is showing. You could also consider what sort of data you're communicating through an image. Like if it's a table or graph, you'll need to think about making that content accessible or offering an alternative. This slide shows a screenshot of Acrobat Reader Pro with a tag panel open on the left side and the tagging tool on the right side. You can see that the PDF has a P or paragraph tags and H or heading tags in the same way that an HTML document would. If you want to make a PDF accessible, this is something you would need to familiarize yourself with. There's even a handy checker that will validate the document and identify any problems. Unfortunately, almost nobody tags PDFs because they're often just generated by whatever layout software was used to create the document, like InDesign. And most publishers don't really consider accessibility tagging. So the problem with PDFs is that accessibility isn't something that's inherent at the source of the production, but rather applied after the fact. And then add to this the ubiquity of the format in academic publishing, you can see why it's a problem that's only going to get worse. In case you're not aware, there's a drafted list of recommendations for post-secondary education standards that will likely get appended to the AODA. And there's even a whole section dedicated to accessible PDFs that states post-secondary institutions shall use a PDF document only if an accessible alternative is also simultaneously available. I'm not sure what that means for libraries, but given that most digital content is in the form of PDF, this might be a major problem in the not too distant future. I'm not sure how much of a concern this is in the library community at the moment, and I'd be interested to hear how others are interpreting this. Something we might discuss in the QA, for instance. Anyway, like images, all audio and video content now needs to be captioned. As of January of this year, this is an AODA requirement, but fortunately, a lot of the conferencing software we use for presentations has audio captioning built in, which manages to do an okay-ish job in transcribing audio. The more difficult part is describing images in a video, which is why I think whenever we post a recorded presentation, we also need to include the slides, which goes back to my earlier point about the importance of making presentations accessible. From now on, you should be thinking of your slides and presentations as web content, and all of the same rules apply. It's also important to describe any images on the screen as part of the presentation. So on this page, there's a screenshot of our last webinar on YouTube showing caption text layered over top. Another accessibility consideration that applies across all content and not just the web is the contrast between text and background. This one's a bit trickier because the difference between the text and its background needs to be measured, especially if you're planning on using your own color scheme that's different than the standard blue or black text over a white background. Oftentimes, software like PowerPoint or Word will give you the option to choose a document theme that comes with its own color scheme. Those color schemes might not meet WCAG standards and should be tested. So there are two standards to consider. There's WCAG AA and AAA, which outline different degrees of contrast. 4.5 to 1 for WCAG AA and 7 to 1 for AAA, where the greater the contrast, the more likely someone who might not have complete blindness but has significant visual impairments will be able to read it. This is what those differences might look like in real life. The text on the left shows different levels of contrast, and the text on the right is what that text might look like for people with reduced vision who can't perceive contrast in the same way. Even browsers have built-in accessibility tools that can simulate contrast loss, and most automatic testers will catch contrast issues. For instance, this slide shows the accessibility tools that are built into Firefox. There are also lots of contrast checkers that can be used when deciding on a color scheme to use. This slide shows the online contrast checker from webaim.org. On to links. Links also need to be descriptive so that a user knows where the link takes them, which essentially means avoiding link text like read more or click here. And I've certainly been guilty of that. Screen readers and even voice control software can present a list of all the links on a page to make it faster to navigate. And using non-descriptive text can make those links difficult to understand. In the case of the journal's browse page, for instance, which is pictured here, the link "See More Top-Cited Journals" shows up a number of times. And even though the text is descriptive enough, the fact that it shows up 7 times the same descriptive text can make it confusing. The user needs to infer how one link is different from another based on the order of the content. This is easy for sighted users because the layout of the page lends meaning to the link. But if someone is trying to quickly navigate using a link list, they might have a hard time determining which link corresponds with which section. Not only does it slow down people using screen readers, but voice control software as well, since they'll need to differentiate which of the same labeled links they want clicked. The elements list box on the screen that is over top of the screenshot is a feature of the NVDA screen reader and lists all the various ways a person using the software might navigate the content on a page. Just like you're not going to sit there and read every single word on every single web page you visit, a screen reader user will use the navigation tools in a screen reader to skip through content. And how well those tools work depends on all of these things that we're talking about today. Headings. Headings are an essential navigational component for screen readers. Sighted users can rely on layout cues to understand the semantic structure of a page, but without the visual cues that tell you how content is organized, it can be impossible to figure out how one set of text is different from the next. This is why headings are critical and must be used correctly, not just for stylistic reasons where you want to make text a certain size. The number one rule here is that heading levels can't be skipped. If you treat your headings like a table or table of content or tree structure, like in the image on the left, then your content is both more accessible and usable than like 95% of the content on the web. If headings are used for identifying parts of a page, sometimes they can seem redundant and at odds with a layout design. Most sighted users will instantly identify a search form without needing it labeled as such because they know what an input box and button do. In cases like these, the common convention is to have a screen reader only heading. In this example, the H1 tag has a special CSS style class that uses every trick in the book to hide a heading from view, but still have it readable by the screen reader. And I have a theory that when heading structures are broken or incomplete, it's because of this. Either the page creators don't have the ability to add screen reader only classes or don't think of including them. This screenshot shows the heading structure of the results page on journals. There are a lot of headings on this page, some of which are for screen readers only. H1 is always the title of the page. And then since the page is split into two columns, those headings are both H2. As you can see, style has nothing to do with the heading structure. The screen reader only headings introduce each section of content like authors and source information so that a user knows what the content is before hearing it. It also allows screen reader users to quickly jump around the page using a minimal amount of keystrokes, since each heading can be accessed with a dedicated key. So for example, pressing the number 3 repeatedly will move the screen reader through each title in the results list. And if it's something interesting, pressing 4 will move into the H4 headings for more information. And then returning to the list again means just pressing the number 3 again. Without headings, each list item would just be a continuous stream of text like this. This screenshot shows the same results page with the headings and text styling for each result removed. If I presented this to sighted users, I would probably lose my job. And yet this is how people who rely on screen readers experience most content. Landmarks. So what headings are for content, landmarks are for page layout. If landmarks are implemented correctly, a screen reader can quickly move to the navigation or main sections and then dig deeper into a section using headings. There are only a handful of landmarks in HTML, and this is only something you need to worry about if you're designing HTML pages from scratch. If you're creating content through a content management system, landmarks should already be built in. The image on this slide shows the HTML5 section elements page on the W3C website. You can see the different landmarks highlighted, and in the description, it shows which landmarks can be contained inside of other landmarks. That's probably the most important thing to keep in mind. And most HTML checkers will catch this. So if you have, for instance, content info contained within a main tag, that's not right. And that'll come up in any kind of WCAG checker. This slide shows a screenshot of the Scholars Portal Journals homepage with the landmarks and headings listed inside of the Wave accessibility checker extension for Firefox. You can see that there's a navigation landmark followed by a search landmark, then main, and finally footer. With a screen reader, you can quickly navigate these large sections by clicking whatever key is assigned to landmarks. So I have a video demo. Let me switch my share here. So in this video, hang on, I'm not sure if I'm sharing the audio or not. Yep. Okay, so in this video, I'll be demonstrating how headings and landmarks on a page allow a screen reader user to get a sense of what's landmarks on a page. As I've mentioned, headings and landmarks allow for quick scans using a minimal amount of keystrokes. I'm using NVDA, which is a free screen reader for Windows, and headings are accessible by clicking on their corresponding number. So to scan all of the H1 headings, I just click the number 1 repeatedly and the number 2 for H2 headings and so on. Let me know if you don't hear anything in the video.
Clickable banner landmark library search visited link heading level 1. Search page heading level 1. Welcome to the new library service platform heading level 1. No next heading at level 1. Support heading level 2. Why switch to a new search system? New features heading level 2. What else is changing? How will I search for no next heading at chat with the librarian link heading level 3. Library links heading level 3. UOT libraries heading level 3. Contact heading level 3. Follow UTL heading level 3. No next heading at level 3. Well,
so in this headings map or tree on the page, this is the headings map of that page. Can you see what the problem is here? I don't know if you can answer in the chat or not, but basically the semantic structure is broken. If I wanted to contact someone at the library, I would need to look under the level 2 heading, how will I search for items, which isn't very intuitive. And to quickly check the heading structure, I'm using a Firefox extension called Headings Map.
Welcome to the new library service. Search page heading level 1. Search landmark search field combo box collapsed has autocomplete editable search for books, ebook. Search landmark. A. C. C. E. S. S. I. B. L. Y. I. N. L. I. B. I. S. Alert loading results. Alert loading results. Collapsed. Library search accessibility in libraries document. Clickable search landmark clear search text button. Select search tab everything button sub. Continue. Select pre-filter all items. Submit search button. No next heading at level 1. Search results page heading level 1. Banner landmark library search visited link heading level 1. No previous heading at level 1. Search results page heading level 1. Search landmark search field combo box collapsed has autocomplete editable accessibility, list with 2 items main landmark results heading level 2. Page 1 heading level 2. Complementary landmark filter your results heading level 2. No next heading at level 2. List with 2 items page 1 heading level 2. Clickable 1. Checkbox not checked select record, link image 1. Marked content accessibility out of marked content of academic marked content library out of marked content websites in North America : current status and trends left paren, 2002-2012 right paren, link heading level 3. Clickable marked content library out of marked content services for people with disabilities : a guide to materials, services, and physical marked content accessibility out of marked content in the public marked content libraries out of marked clickable marked content accessibility out of marked content of academic marked content library out of marked content websites in North America : current status and trends left paren.
All right, excessive verbiage. Who got sick of listening to marked content? For some reason, Primo uses mark tags to highlight the search terms in the results list, even though they're not actually highlighted for sighted users. Imagine having to listen to marked content over and over again as you move through each item in a results list. This happens a lot where tags are used without considering their impact on assistive technology.
Accessibility of academic library. Alert, please sign in to check if there are request options. Need help? Need help? Marked content accessibility out of marked content of academic marked main property page locations heading level 3. No next heading at level 3. Details heading level 4. More information heading level 4. Citations heading level 4. No next heading at level 4. No next heading at level 5. No next heading at level main property page locations marked content accessibility out of marked content of academic Camo, Dave, marked content library out of marked content high tech, 2013, Vol, clickable peer reviewed. Button visited link read article. Busy. About : blank. Weblegend University of Toronto document. Udo rid / joy nid edit has autocomplete Kawula. Weblegend University of Toronto busy.
Okay, this is a huge pet peeve of mine, and a lot of libraries are guilty of it. There's nothing on this page to indicate what it is and what needs to be done here. There aren't even any headings. The words web login, IDPZ, user ID, and join ID aren't real words. They're jargon. Screen readers struggle with pronouncing things that aren't actual words. If you do a web search for web login, you won't find a definition, just a list of results pointing to off-campus login pages across North America. And how is the acronym IDPZ useful to any user? Does anybody know what IDPZ means? No, I don't know.
Banner landmark link go to U of T homepage frame clickable https://ibs.uteroth.uteronto.ca/line assets/img out of frame weblegend ibs. Frame clickable main landmark heading level 2 choose an authentication duo push recommended. Button send me a push. Unavailable. Accessibility of academic library websites in North America : current status and trends left paren, 2002-2012 right paren, no next heading at level 1. Main landmark accessibility of academic abstract heading level 2, keywords heading level 2, citation heading level 2. Keywords heading level 2, abstract heading level 2. Purpose heading level 3. Abstract, no previous heading, accessibility of academic library, link Dave Camo, link Axel Schmetz, button view contributors. No next heading at level 1, no next heading, access, no previous heading at level 1, link Dave Camo, link library high tech. ISSN : 0737-8831. Elements list dialog. Tree view. Level 0 accessibility of academic library websites in North America. Level 1 downloads 1 of 18. Downloads heading level 6. 3567. Link altmetrics graphic article has an altmetrics score of 7.
Okay, so I should have prefaced this whole video to say that I'm just trying to find the PDF file. That's the goal of the task here. So this was also an issue with Primo as well. And with most platforms, I find the most important link is the one that leads to the article, but there's never a heading for it. So a user has to waste time hunting for it. Like I assumed that the heading downloads was where I would find the PDF file, but in this case, it's just the download count for the article. And then for some reason, it's sitting as an unnested H6 tag right under the H1 tag. Nevertheless, this page makes really great use of landmarks. So I thought I'd point them out. And here I'm using a Firefox extension called Landmarks to see them. So you can see that banners at the top, then navigation, then there's a search landmark, there's a breadcrumb landmark, there's main, and then there's a table of contents. So one of the, I guess, characteristics of this page is that it's extremely long. So you have like H1 as the title, and then you have a whole slew of H2 tags, and it takes a really long time to get to the footer. So you wouldn't be navigating with H2 tags to get to the footer because the entire article is on the page. So just hitting the landmark key will take you straight to the bottom of the page.
Visited link PDF left paren, 280 KB right paren. Menu. Open link in new tab. Open link in save. Accessibility of academic library website. Enter name of file to save to. Dialog. File name : combo box collapsed.
A C C E S S I B I F Y I R S.
Accessibility of academic library websites in North America : current status and trends left paren, 2000 and NVDA speak elements list row 1 column 3. Downloads row 1 column 2. Downloads window. Selected. Last month left paren. Today grouping expanded. Accessibility in libraries 1 of 2. Edit. Accessibility in libraries.pdf- Adobe Acrobat Reader DC left paren, 32-bit right paren. Reading order : combo box collapsed Alt+R. Accessibility cancel button. Processing page 4 of 26. Progress bar 15%. Accessibility in libraries.pdf- Adobe Acrobat Reader DC left paren, 32-bit right paren. Page 0 Library High-Tech Volume 31 Number 1, 10.1108/073788313130. Accessibility of academic library websites in North America. Current status and trends left paren, 2. Dave Camo. Howard - Axel Schmetzk. Library. Abstract purpose and the purpose of this paper is to present longitudinal data on the accessibility. No next heading at level 1. No next heading at level 2. No next heading at level 3. Elements list dialog. Tree view.
So documents need tags too. One of the things that often gets overlooked when we talk about web accessibility, and I've mentioned this, is that although we could make our user interfaces accessible, the actual content they serve rarely is. As I mentioned in previous slides, file formats like PDFs or Word documents can be made a lot more accessible using the same concepts as web pages. A document file also needs to have its headings, tables, and images tagged in the same way. The screenshot here shows a remediated PDF where someone manually had to tag the headings. So imagine being a dozen pages into a document and needing to refer back to a previous page or section without having access to a heading tree. You'll be wasting a tremendous amount of time trying to get to the content you want. And if you open a PDF in Acrobat Reader and check its properties, I guarantee you this is what you'll likely see under tagged PDF, no. And that's the end of our screencast. So that took almost 10 minutes to find one PDF file. Let me switch back to my slides. All right, so the following slides get a little more HTML heavy, but there are a lot of still important things to consider, especially if you are using something like a WYSIWYG editor to create web content. Tables, for instance, also need captions. That goes without saying, and headings, and they also need headings so the person knows what the data is and be able to navigate through it. If your tables are large and complex, consider offering a link to an Excel or other spreadsheet file. I won't go too much into forms because we could do a whole separate presentation on accessible forms. But the key thing here is that every input or control element must be labeled, even if it's obvious to a sighted user what the input is for. These labels don't need to be visible and can be hidden using CSS, like I talked about with headings in the previous slides. So, for example, this page shows the Scholars Portal books search form with the underlying markup open in the code inspector beside it. It shows all of the hidden labels like enter search terms or select query limiter, which are screen reader only. When it comes to designing with HTML, there's always more than one way to do something. In this example, there are all of the various ways that buttons can be displayed, and they would all pass accessibility checkers. But each of them also has faults, and they may not be handled the same way across assistive technologies. That is why we should always use semantic HTML elements. If something has the behavior of a button, then always use a button. If something looks like a table, then put it in a table. Or if you have a list of items, just use list tags. The same applies for landmark elements like header, nav, and main. A couple of other things I'll mention briefly, although they probably merit their own workshop, is the importance of adaptive layouts, which are pretty common today given the multitude of screens and devices that a web page can be viewed on. Adaptive layouts also ensure that content scales well if someone requires screen magnification. Also, touch screens are an assistive technology in themselves, so designing for mobile these days is imperative. If your site makes use of JavaScript to change content dynamically, those changes must be announced to a screen reader. This code example shows the alert for the expanding subject lists on the Scholars Portal journal search form. So if somebody clicks the button, this alert gets announced by the screen reader. And finally, never stop testing. Content and vendor interfaces change all the time, and there's no guarantee that they're getting better. So testing is so important that the next part of the webinar will deal exclusively with testing. And over to you, Kaitlin.
Thanks, Bart. Just gonna switch my screen share here. All right, so as Bart said, I'm gonna talk about web accessibility testing. So there are a lot of different methods and tools that we can use to guide our testing, some of which you have access to and probably even have in front of you. So your keyboard is actually a really powerful accessibility testing tool. By using only your keyboard and your tab key to navigate a website and avoiding using your mouse completely, you can uncover significant accessibility issues without installing any special software. So when you test with a keyboard, some things to look for include if you can tell where you are on the page. So usually, there'd be a square around interactive elements when you hit the tab key. This is called a focus outline. You want to make sure that those are appearing and that they're also following proper contrast guidelines. You want to make sure that interactive content can be selected. So if you have buttons and form inputs, you want to make sure that the keyboard can access all of the things on the page. You also want to make sure the tab order is logical. This can depend on the layout of the page, but you want to generally make sure that it's not jumping around all over the place and that it makes sense for the page layout. You also want to make sure you can use all of the components on the page with your keyboard. So things like the navigation menus, drop-down elements, and forms, you should be able to interact with and use all of those solely with your keyboard. And the last one I wanted to mention is tab traps. These are something you want to look out for. This is a place where a user might get stuck and they can't move forward. So this, unfortunately, you can find an example of this in Spot Docs. So I'm just going to switch over to Spot Docs here to show you what I mean by this. So I'm pressing my tab key. At the start, there are some skip links that are only visible or usable to a screen reader user. Down at the bottom left, I can see like what the URL is for that skip link, where it would be taking me. So I'm going to keep pressing my tab key. It's going through a few skip links. Another skip link. So now I can see I'm on the icon for Spot Docs at the top. I can see a square around it. That's my focus outline that I want to look for. Then I go over to Spaces, which is a dropdown. If I press it down on my keyboard, then I'll see what that dropdown is. If I press Shift Tab, I will go backwards through the navigation. So then after Spaces, I'm going to get taken over to this search input, which is unfortunately a problem. So what happens here is it opens immediately, which is not great. It doesn't have any button to close it, so which is also not ideal. So now I'm in the search, whether or not I want to search for something or not. If I keep hitting tab, I get taken through the elements on this search modal. And then I keep hitting tab, and now I'm not quite sure where I am, but I think, oh, now I'm back at the start of the page. So I've gotten stuck. There's no button, but if I press escape on my keyboard, it will close this modal. But now what's happened is I'm back at my skip links. So unfortunately, I'm going to end up in that search again. So, you know, unless a user is really familiar with that page, they know, oh, I need to use the skip links. They're going to get stuck on this page. And it's just not a good experience for users. So the next way that you can test websites is by using built-in zooming functionality. So you can try zooming your website up to 200%, which is the number that is referenced in WCAG. You want to check if all the content on the page is still readable and visible, if there's any elements on the page that are overlapping, and that interactive elements like form inputs and buttons are all still usable. You can also try using zoom functionality in your operating system, or if you have access to it, there are paid software available as well, like Zoom Text. Another step of testing is reviewing text alternatives, which Bart talked about earlier. This includes making sure that audio content has text alternatives and video content has captions. You'll also want to review the alt text on your images. An automated tester will tell you if you're missing an alt attribute, but it won't necessarily tell you if the alt text you've provided is appropriate for the context of that image, or if an image has been marked as decorative that shouldn't have been. So when you review alt text, consider what the image is adding to the page and how it connects to that text content. If an image is a link, then the alt text should describe what that link does rather than just the image itself. Some automated tools will show you the alt text, which is helpful for testing. You can also test sites with high contrast themes. In Windows, you can enable this in the operating system. Mac does have a high contrast theme as well, but as far as I know, it's more commonly used in Windows as an assistive technology. And after turning it on, checking for things like content disappearing or low color contrast in text or icons. So on this screen, you can see an example of a high contrast mode. In the first image here, we have the default operating system settings in Windows, and we're viewing search results in Primo in Chrome. I've searched for accessibility in libraries, and it's highlighting terms that I've searched for. This is where we noticed that issue earlier, where they have these marked content tags that Bart had noticed. So in the second image, we've turned on high contrast mode, and these same tags are making the text that I searched for no longer visible. So this carries over onto the item pages as well. And we can also see that icons have pretty low contrast on this black background. So another way to test is, of course, with automated testing tools. So these are web applications or browser extensions that you can use to do a scan of a web page and find issues that can be detected programmatically. It's really important to note these tests do not catch everything. Depending on your site, I've seen numbers from 30 up to 60% of issues that they might catch, but they're a really powerful tool that can find high impact accessibility issues. So some things that they would catch would be things like color contrast problems, missing alt attributes, incorrect heading structures, but they might miss things like inappropriate alt text or an incorrect tabbing order or elements that can't be accessed at all through a keyboard. I've included a link to a blog post by a developer where he created an incredibly inaccessible website, which received a 100% score on an automated tester. And this is a really good demonstration of why you should never solely rely on these tools. So some examples of these include Wave. This is developed by WebAIM and is a browser extension that shows you accessibility issues and an outline of your page's headings. Axe DevTools is developed by DQ, which is an accessibility company. It also has extensions for Chrome and Firefox. Lighthouse, which you may have used before, is a tool that's built into Google Chrome directly. So if you already have Chrome, you have access to it. It also has other testing tools built into it for things like website performance. And the last one I wanted to mention is a tool called Sally. So this was developed at Ryerson and is geared towards web content creators. It's not necessarily suited for full accessibility testing, but it is helpful for web content creators that want to quickly verify a page that they're creating is using things like proper headings and alt text. So I'm just going to show you an example of Wave on Racer. I'm going to pick on Racer a little bit. So I'm going to start by right-clicking and clicking Wave this page. I already have Wave installed. So then I see this full summary panel. So I see I have 2 errors on this page, 2 contrast errors. It's showing I have 9 alerts. These are things that may or may not be issues, things that I need to review and check. 7 features. So this is like things that exist already on the page, like alt text or form labels. Structural elements, there are 6. So this is things, again, like headings, or in this case, there are some lists on the page. And then ARIA. This page is not using any ARIA elements, but if it was, I would be able to also see these on Wave. If I go over to the details, I can see more information about what these numbers are. So I see 2 errors, something's missing alternative alt text. If I click on this icon, it takes me down to it, and we get a circle kind of outline around it. And it's saying this book image down here doesn't have alt text. Most likely, this should have an empty alt attribute. It looks to be decorative, but that is missing. We're also missing the language on this page. That's especially important for screen readers to know what the language is of the content, but this page is missing the language completely. We've got 2 contrast errors. If I click it, I can see what it is. So up here, we've got some pretty light gray text on the background, which is not going to pass contrast checkers. And then we have some alerts. So these are things that, may or may not be issues, but you need to check them. Bart talked a lot earlier about page regions. It's telling us you don't have any page regions. We've got instances of very small text, which is going to be problematic for low vision users, but may or may not be an error. And we have a table being used. So there's often been issues with people using tables for layout and not properly marking them up, which can be very confusing for assistive technologies. Layouts should largely be used for tabular information. Then we have these features. So alternative text that we already have on the page, we can see up here. This has the alt text of zPortal logo. Down here, this has alt text as well. It is a link, so it should be a little more descriptive, but there is alt text present. We've got some form labels, a couple of skip links, and then we have our structural elements. So in this case, we have 1 level 1 heading on this page and 5 unordered lists. If I click on any of these little information icons, it's going to show me more information about what this error means or what this feature is, which is very helpful if you're not already aware of what the problem is. And then the structure, which Bart showed earlier, is available here. And finally, the contrast. So when we have contrast errors, we can get more information about what the colors are, what's the exact contrast ratio number, if it's failing at the AA level and AAA level, and for what sizes of text. And finally, I just wanted to note up at the top here too, there's this button for turning styles on and off. Sometimes this can be helpful if it's a complex page or if there's an element that's hidden and you can't figure out where the accessibility problem is. Sometimes turning this off can help you get to the bottom of an error that's showing up. All right, so we saw examples of screen reader functionality earlier, so I'm not going to go into too much detail, but another way you can test sites is to actually get familiar with how to use one. There are a lot of options, including NVDA and JAWS, VoiceOver, and TalkBack on Android. Of course, it's not a replacement for an everyday screen reader user, but it can help you get a better understanding of how a screen reader functions and the kind of issues that can come up for this user group. So I've also included a couple of helpful resources on this page as well. DQ has published some cheat sheets for different screen readers, and they also have printable versions as well, which are really helpful for getting used to like the different shortcuts and things like that. And I've also linked to the WebAIM Screen Reader User Survey, which is a really interesting resource that shows some statistics on things like the most popular screen readers, different browser combinations and things like that. The sample size for the survey is somewhat small, but the findings can be really helpful for guiding your testing. In general, while we're doing testing, it's a good idea to test things in multiple web browsers. Not all assistive technologies interact with every browser in the same way, and websites can render websites differently in different browsers. When thinking about how to approach testing for a large website, consider testing site templates rather than every individual page. You might have content types for things like a news post or an event page, and you might see the same accessibility issues popping up on every page of that content type. So this can help you get to the root of an issue and fix it in multiple places at once if you just fix it in that one template. Another approach you might take is testing the core functions and workflows of a website. For example, you might test if a user can get from the home page to log in, all while only using a keyboard. You could also try other workflows like searching or downloading content. Bart showed us how he was trying to get to a PDF file, or something like using a contact form, depending on the nature of the website and what the most common tasks are. I've also linked to a resource from the A11Y project. They have a really helpful checklist that can help you guide your testing efforts if you're not sure where to start. So a few other testing tools and utilities. I will say that I'm not a PDF expert by any means, but a couple of options you do have available are Acrobat Pro, which we saw Bart demo earlier a little bit. There's also a tool called the PAC Accessibility Checker, which is Windows only. You might look at that if you don't have access to Acrobat Pro. In terms of contrast, there's a desktop application called the Color Contrast Analyzer, which I really like. It has like color pickers built into it, so you can just quickly test colors. And of course, there's also the web-based WebAIM contrast checker. For content, content's a bit of a tricky one, but it's important to be thinking about content in terms of cognitive accessibility and just general readability of text. So there's a tool called Hemingway Editor, which I really like. It shows you like the readability scores of your text and ways that you might improve. And it can also just kind of generally improve your writing. If you're somebody who's writing code a lot, then there are also plugins for code text editors. One that I really like is the Axe Accessibility Linter for Visual Studio Code. And lastly, there's also command line tools. So these could be run directly from the command line or as part of scripts. And a couple of these are the Axe command line interface and a tool called Pally. So of course, the best way that you can find accessibility issues is by testing with actual users. Of course, this can be challenging and time consuming, but you'll find a lot more from everyday users of assistive technologies than you'll find on your own, unless you are a user of assistive tech. If you're doing user testing at your institution, think about how you might be able to incorporate accessibility into your workflows. There's also a lot of other ways we can think about integrating accessibility into our workflows. This includes things like training staff, especially developers and web content creators, making sure we're considering accessibility early in our processes and not something at the end. You know, we're not developing a website and then at the end going, oh, wait, is this accessible? That's just not going to be a good time in general. You also want to include accessibility in, you know, your overall testing and publishing workflows. And you want to give ownership to the people that are responsible for accessibility. So this is I think, a tough one. You might have 1 or 2 people at your institution who are responsible for accessibility. But those people also need to be able to say, no, we can't launch this website, or no, we can't get this product at this point in time. If those people don't have the power to say no, then you're not really fully committing to accessibility as an organization. It's also valuable, I think, to shift your thinking away from the idea of 100% accessible or fully compliant. I know this can be difficult. You know, you might get an email from somebody saying, is our website compliant? But accessibility is more of a spectrum, and it's not really a pass-fail. Really, you should think of it as, you know, there's always ways that we can be improving. There's always, you know, new issues that we might find that might come up. And I mentioned third-party tools, and it's good to evaluate these for accessibility as well, as much as you can. So whether it's something from a vendor or an open source tool, it's good to evaluate these other kinds of applications. You could ask about or look for existing accessibility practices or policies. You want to look for avenues for reporting and resolving accessibility issues. How quickly will a critical accessibility issue be resolved? It can also be helpful to be upfront about what your expectations are and the standards that you need to meet. And of course, test. A company might say that their product is accessible, but the best way to tell is by doing your own testing. I do want to make a note about a growing number of vendors that are now offering products that promise to make your website immediately accessible by adding 1 line of code or a little bit of JavaScript. They claim they will fix your website accessibility with AI. These products might appear as a site widget or a site overlay. It's important to note that these products have been very heavily criticized in the digital accessibility community, and they don't guarantee WCAG compliance. Many of the features of these tools are already available to users in their operating systems as well. So as I noted earlier, automated tests can't find all accessibility issues, and that applies to these products too. The website overlay fact sheet has more information about these kinds of products. And you can also see one in action on the COU website if you want to see what they look like. So the last piece of this is user feedback. You want to make sure that accessibility help is available throughout a site, a page, and at different known pain points. Don't bury this information at the bottom of a footer or as the last item on a page. Your accessibility statement should be honest and not just say we're WCAG compliant. State what work you've done, what's been tested, what technology you've used to test, and finally, what the known problems area are that you know still need to be addressed. The statement can also include a brief description about how to navigate your site, an outline of common page templates and their heading structures, and most importantly, information about how to get help and how they can give you feedback. We don't always get accessibility right on the first try, so having a way that users can tell us about barriers they're encountering is essential. So I want to wrap up with a few more resources. For overall information, some great resources are WebAIM and the A11Y project. They have a great checklist, which I mentioned. as well as a great collection of other resources, and they do a weekly newsletter of accessibility related links. And of course, there also is WCAG itself, which is a great reference point. For communities, we of course have our own OCUL accessibility community. There's also the International Association of Accessibility Professionals, which has paid memberships that give access to webinars, community forums, and they also have certifications for accessibility as well. A11Y Talks is a group that does online meetups, which are free every 1 to 2 months on different accessibility topics. They have an event coming up at the end of this month on deafness. So if you're interested, I would recommend checking them out. And there's also a web accessibility Slack community that's available by invite. Please feel free to reach out to me if you would like an invite to that. They're a really great resource for diving into like tricky web accessibility problems. If you want to keep learning, there's a lot of online courses out there too. The W3C has an introduction to accessibility course, and Google has a course that is more developer focused that is free. DQ, which I've mentioned a few times, has a number of high quality courses. If you have the budget, they're around, I think, $100 US each for their online versions. And lastly, I wanted to note that in March, there is a free web accessibility conference coming up called AXCon. This is also run by DQ. Bart and I both attended it last year, and they had a lot of really interesting talks. So that brings us to the end. Now we have time for any questions you might have or any further discussion. We've got about 15 minutes.
All right, thanks, Kaitlin and Bart. I'm going to end the recording now, and then I will give you the power to unmute yourselves if you want to ask questions.